Billionaire fell in love with a poor girl who helped homeless people. What she did will make you cry. Marcus Wellington could buy anything, except the feeling he saw in her eyes that night. Tiana, pregnant and exhausted, slipped out the back door of the restaurant carrying a paper bag of food she could barely afford. He followed, curious, until he watched her kneel in the rain, breaking bread in half for a shivering child who wasn't hers. Why would a woman with nothing give away the only meal she had? And why in that moment did the richest man in the city feel poorer than her? The rain was steady, a cold drizzle that smeared the yellow glow of the alley's single street lamp into streaks of gold. Marcus stood still in the shadows, the collar of his coat pulled high, water dripping from his hair. The boy in front of her couldn't have been older than 8. His bare feet were muddy, his shirt so thin that the outline of his ribs showed every time he shivered. Tiana tore the bread slowly, as if each piece was a measured act, something sacred. She placed half into the boy's trembling hands, the other half she wrapped back in the paper. "You eat first," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the rain. The boy looked at her, unsure, then bit into the bread as though afraid it might disappear. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. This wasn't charity for show. This was sacrifice. She reached into the bag again and pulled out a small cup of soup, steam curling into the damp air. She set it beside the boy, and he bent forward, cupping it in both hands to drink. Marcus took a step forward. Tiana's head snapped up. Her eyes locked onto him instantly, wide, guarded, a mix of fear and defiance. Her free hand instinctively pressed against her stomach. "You've been following me," she said, her tone more accusation than question. He didn't deny it. "Yes." The boy froze, glancing between them. Tiana shifted slightly, placing herself between Marcus and the child. "What do you want?" Her voice trembled, but not from fear alone. Marcus's gaze lingered on her face, the faint dark circles under her eyes, the damp strands of hair sticking to her cheek, the way she seemed ready to shield the boy at any cost. "I want to understand," he said simply. "You're in the wrong alley for curiosity," she shot back. A car horn blared somewhere distant, the sound echoing between the wet brick walls. Marcus stepped closer, but slow, deliberate. "You work double shifts, you're carrying a child, and yet you give away food you need yourself. Why?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Because nobody else will." Something in her voice hit him harder than expected. The quiet certainty, the utter lack of self-pity. The boy finished the soup, wiped his mouth with his sleeve, and without a word slipped back into the maze of alleys. Tiana watched him go, then turned back to Marcus. "You've seen what you came to see. Now go." Marcus didn't move. "I can help." Her eyes narrowed. "People like you don't help without a price." "Maybe I don't want anything." "Then that makes you even more dangerous," she said, brushing past him toward the street. Marcus watched her go, the rain dripping steadily from the brim of his coat. He could have left it there. Should have. But the image of her breaking bread in the rain refused to let him walk away. The next morning, Marcus sat in the corner booth of the cafe across from the restaurant where Tiana worked. The place was modest. Mismatched chairs, walls painted in fading shades of cream, a faint smell of coffee and old wood. He had chosen this spot deliberately, the perfect vantage point to watch the narrow side alley. His assistant, David Chen, slid into the seat opposite him. "You've been here since 6, David said, glancing at his watch. "You planning to tell me what exactly we're doing?" Marcus didn't look up from his coffee. "She's working a double shift today, pregnant, and she still gave away her dinner last night." David arched a brow. "And that's our business because she's not like the others," Marcus said quietly, almost to himself. They waited. Through the cafe window, Marcus spotted her, Tiana, in her faded uniform, stepping out of the side door to toss a bag of trash. Even from across the street, she looked exhausted. She rubbed her lower back with one hand, the other balancing the trash bag, A manager barked something from inside, and she disappeared again. David sipped his tea. If you want to help her, write a check. You're good at those. Marcus shook his head. You don't write a check to someone who looks at you like you're the enemy. That afternoon, he sent David to ask quiet questions. Not official inquiries, those would raise suspicion, but subtle ones. Who she rented from, where she shopped, which buses she took home. The answers trickled in. She lived in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. She paid rent in cash. No family visited. No partner. Every Wednesday night she took the long way home, detouring through the poorest part of the city. That was enough for Marcus. 2 nights later, he followed her again. This time she carried 2 large grocery bags. She walked quickly, shoulders hunched against the cold, until she reached a squat, weather-beaten building with a flickering neon sign, Unity Community Center. The door creaked as she stepped inside. Marcus lingered outside a moment, watching shapes move behind the warped glass. Then he pushed the door open. The smell of dust and damp paper hit him first. Inside, children's laughter mingled with the low murmur of conversation. A battered piano stood in the corner. A volunteer in a faded jacket read aloud to a small group. Paintings, bright, messy, full of hope, lined the peeling walls. Tiana was at the far end of the hall, unpacking groceries onto a long wooden table. She noticed him instantly, her eyes narrowing. You again. I told you I wanted to understand. You're trespassing. Marcus looked around. This place. He ran a hand along the wall where the paint was cracked and curling. It's falling apart. And still standing, she replied sharply. Not for long if the ceiling keeps leaking like that, he said, nodding toward a dark water stain spreading above the piano. She stiffened. We make do. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. How long have you been keeping this place alive? Her gaze flickered to the children nearby, then back to him. Long enough to know that strangers with expensive shoes don't stick around when it gets hard. The challenge in her voice was like a locked door. He felt the urge, no, the need, to find the key. I'm not here to take anything from you, Tiana, he said. I just want to know what it would take to keep this from collapsing. She stared at him for a long moment, then gave a humorless smile. More than you're willing to give. Marcus almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she had no idea how wrong she was. A week later, Unity Community Center was quieter than usual. Rain drummed steadily against the sagging roof, each drop a reminder of how close they were to losing the building. Marcus stood in the middle of the main hall, flanked by David and a folded stack of documents. His presence felt out of place among the chipped furniture and scuffed floors, like a suit at a funeral. Tiana came in from the storage room carrying a box of mismatched mugs. She froze when she saw him. What now? I brought numbers, Marcus said evenly, and a plan. Maria, one of the longtime volunteers, emerged from the kitchen with flour-dusted hands, frowning. We don't need a plan from an outsider. We've had plenty of those. They always end the same, with promises and nothing to show for them. Marcus ignored the jab and set the documents on the nearest table. Roof repairs, updated wiring, new heating system. I've already spoken to contractors who can start next week. Carlos, another volunteer, crossed his arms. And what's the catch? There isn't one, Marcus replied. That's what they all say, Maria muttered. Tiana set the mugs down with a clatter. Why? She demanded, stepping closer to him. You could spend your money on anything. Why here? Marcus hesitated. The truth, that he couldn't stop thinking about her in the rain, breaking bread for a child who wasn't hers, felt too personal, too raw to hand over. Because this place matters, even if you don't believe I mean that yet. Tiana's gaze searched his face, looking for the lie. David cleared his throat. The funds would be handled transparently. In your name, not his. You'd stay in full control of the center. He just wants to make sure it doesn't collapse around you. silence stretched. The rain seemed louder, dripping into a bucket by the piano. Maria looked at Tiana. If we let him in, we're tied to him. What happens when he changes his mind? When he decides we're not worth the expense? Tiana's hands tightened around the edge of the table. Pride screamed at her to say no, to keep scraping by the way they always had. But then she thought of the children huddled under blankets during the last cold snap, of the ceiling tiles falling dangerously close to where they played. She swallowed hard. On my terms, she said finally, voice steady. Every decision goes through me. No press, no speeches, no photo ops. You help because you want to, not because it looks good. Marcus nodded without hesitation. Agreed. Maria shook her head, unconvinced, but said nothing more. Marcus extended his hand. Tiana looked at it, the rain still pattering on the roof above them, before finally taking it. It was the start of something neither of them fully understood. By the following Monday, the Unity Community Center looked less like a safe haven and more like a battlefield. The sound of hammering and drilling ricocheted through the halls, the air thick with sawdust and the tang of fresh paint. Stacks of lumber leaned against the walls, drop cloths covered the worn floors, and the once familiar smell of old paper and wood was replaced by the sharp scent of construction glue. Tiana stood in the middle of it all, sleeves rolled up, directing volunteers as they moved boxes of donated supplies into temporary storage. Her voice carried over the chaos. Careful with those books. They're for the literacy class. We can't lose them. Marcus arrived with David and a small team of contractors, dressed down in jeans and a black sweater. He didn't blend in, not really. But for the first time, he didn't look like a billionaire here on business. He looked like someone ready to get his hands dirty. Where do you want these heaters? One of the contractors asked. Second floor classrooms, Marcus replied without checking with anyone, his tone naturally authoritative. Tiana stepped over a roll of insulation and stopped in front of him. Don't give orders without asking me first. You're not in one of your boardrooms here. Marcus's jaw tightened, but then he nodded. Fair enough. Where do you want them? She pointed toward the far end of the hall. Storage for now. We need to clear the classrooms before we install anything. They moved together through the building, Marcus taking in the peeling plaster, the warped door frames, the broken windows patched with duct tape. At one point, they stopped outside a small side room. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, Marcus could see neatly folded stacks of baby clothes, boxes of diapers, and a rocking chair in the corner. He glanced at her. This isn't for the center, is it? Tiana's eyes flickered to the room and then away. It's where I sleep when I work too late to go home. Marcus's voice softened. You live here? Sometimes. Saves on bus fare, and I can lock the door in case the wrong kind of people wander in at night. She said it casually, but he could hear the quiet weight beneath the words. They were interrupted by Carlos shouting from upstairs. Tiana, we've got a problem. She hurried ahead, Marcus following. In the second floor hallway, a section of the ceiling sagged ominously, water dripping in steady plinks into a bucket. Carlos shook his head. We started pulling down the damaged plaster, and it's worse than we thought. Black mold. It's in the beams. Marcus stepped closer, his face hardening. We'll replace all of it. That's not cheap, Carlos warned. I said we'll replace all of it, Marcus repeated firmly. Tiana glanced at him, surprised at his decisiveness. You really mean to do this right, don't you? He met her eyes. If we're fixing this place, we're not cutting corners, not when kids' health is at stake. Something unspoken passed between them then, an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, they were on the same side. But down in the main hall, Maria watched the two of them from a distance, her arms folded. And from the way her eyes narrowed, it was clear she wasn't convinced Marcus's generosity came without a price. By the third week of renovations, the Unity Community Center was running like a camp under siege. The children's classes had been moved to borrowed spaces, a church basement, a closed-down storefront, even Maria's own living room on Wednesdays. The volunteers were stretched thin, tempers running short. The rain outside hadn't stopped for 2 days straight, and every downpour reminded them why they were working so desperately to finish. Maria found Tiana in the storage room, sorting through donated coats. "We need to talk," she said, shutting the door behind her. Tiana straightened. "If this is about the heating install, I already told the guys." "It's not about heaters," Maria cut in. "It's about him." Tiana didn't have to ask who. Maria's voice lowered almost a whisper. "You think I haven't seen men like Marcus before? They start out talking about charity and partnership, and before you know it, you're just a footnote in their next PR campaign. And when they're bored, they walk away, and you're left cleaning up the pieces." Tiana leaned against the table, her arms crossed. "He hasn't asked for anything in return." "Yet," Maria said pointedly. "Look, I'm not saying he's a bad man. I'm saying you don't know him, and trusting someone you don't know is how you get burned." Before Tiana could answer, a loud crash echoed through the hall, followed by a child's scream. They both bolted toward the sound. In the main hall, a piece of scaffolding had tipped, sending a paint bucket tumbling from the top. Marcus stood there, his shirt streaked with white paint, holding a small boy tightly against his chest. The bucket lay dented on the floor, paint splattered across the drop cloth. The boy, one of the younger kids who often wandered in after school, was trembling, eyes wide. "It's okay," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. "You're all right." He knelt, checking the boy's arms and head for injuries before handing him over to Carlos. Maria froze in the doorway, watching. "Who let him in here?" Tiana asked sharply. "Door was open," Carlos said, shaking his head. "We didn't see him slip in." Marcus wiped paint from his arm with a rag. "We need a proper safety plan. Kids shouldn't be anywhere near the work zone." "Agreed," Tiana said, already kneeling to mop up the spill. "I'll handle it." Marcus crouched beside her, taking the rag from her hands. "No, we'll handle it." The way he said it, "we," made her pause. Later, when the boy's mother came to pick him up, she hugged Marcus tightly, thanking him over and over. He didn't smile or make a show of it. He simply nodded, then returned to work, shirt still damp with paint. Maria lingered in the doorway long after he left the hall. Her expression had changed, just slightly. It was late evening when the last hammer fell silent. The contractors had gone home hours ago, leaving the Unity Community Center wrapped in a blanket of half-light from a single overhead bulb. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and fresh paint. Tiana was still there, kneeling on the floor with a screwdriver, reassembling a shelf for the art supplies. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands falling over her face. Marcus stepped in quietly, a paper cup of coffee in hand. "You're still working." She didn't look up. "So are you." He set the coffee beside her. "You haven't had dinner." "I've had worse." For a moment, the only sound was the soft scrape of metal on wood as she tightened the screws. Marcus sat down on the floor opposite her, resting his back against the wall. "Maria doesn't trust me," he said finally. Tiana's hands paused. "She doesn't trust easily. Neither do I." He nodded. "I don't blame you. People with my kind of money usually take more than they give." Her eyes flicked up to meet his. "So what makes you different?" He hesitated, then leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "When I was a kid, my father lost everything. We went from a big house in the hills to a 2-room apartment with a leaky roof and no heat. My mother worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. There was a community center down the street that used to let me sit inside after school, no questions asked. I think that place might have saved me." Tiana's expression softened despite herself. "And now you're saving this one." Marcus shook his head. "Trying to. You're the one who's been keeping it alive all this time. I'm just here to keep the walls from falling in." She leaned back against the wall, letting out a breath. "I started volunteering here when I was 19. My mother, she didn't believe in charity, said people needed to help themselves. But I saw kids who didn't have a choice. Some of them remind me of my little brother. He. She trailed off, her eyes drifting to the far wall where the children's drawings hung. Marcus didn't push. After a long pause, she added, "He got caught up with the wrong crowd. Drugs, violence. I couldn't save him. But maybe I can save someone else's brother." Silence settled over them again, heavier this time, but not uncomfortable. Marcus glanced at her hands, raw from work, paint still faintly smudged on her knuckles. "You can't do it alone forever." "I know," she said quietly. "But letting someone in means trusting they won't walk away." "I'm not walking away." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to measure the truth in his voice. Finally, she gave a small nod. Outside, rain began again, tapping softly against the windows. Inside, they sat across from each other on the dusty floor, two people from different worlds, tied now by something more than repairs and obligations. The storm broke at dawn, pounding the city with wind and sheets of rain. By mid-morning, the Unity Community Center was a hive of frantic activity. Contractors covering exposed roofing with tarps, volunteers hustling children and supplies into dry rooms. Tiana was in the kitchen boiling water when Maria burst in, holding a crumpled envelope. "You need to see this." Tiana tore it open, scanning the letter inside. Her stomach dropped. "Notice of inspection. Potential closure." Her voice caught. "The city's sending inspectors next week. If they find structural violations, they can shut us down immediately." Maria's jaw was tight. "And with the renovations half done, they'll find plenty." Before Tiana could reply, Marcus strode in, water dripping from his hair and coat. "I just got a call from my lawyer. The inspection notice is official, but I also heard the timing's not a coincidence." "What do you mean?" Tiana asked. "I mean," Marcus said, his tone like stone, "there's a developer circling this property. If the center closes, they can buy it cheap, tear it down, and put up condos." Maria swore under her breath. "So it's not about safety. It's about money." David appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. "We can push back, but we'll need evidence that the building is already under active repair, with legitimate contracts, permits, and proof that the safety hazards are being addressed." Tiana's chest tightened. "We don't have all that in order yet." Marcus looked at her directly. "Then we will by tomorrow." They spent the rest of the day in a blur, David compiling contracts, Carlos photographing every section under repair, Maria pulling together records of volunteer work and community programs. As night fell, Tiana found Marcus in the main hall, kneeling to tighten bolts on one of the temporary scaffolds. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. He didn't look up. "Because you can't fight this alone. And because the first place that ever gave me hope almost got taken away in the same way. I won't let it happen again." Her throat tightened, but before she could answer, the wind outside rattled the windows so hard it felt like the glass might give. They both turned toward the sound. The storm was getting worse. Maria's voice rang out from the hallway. "The tarps come loose on the roof. Water's coming in over the main hall." Tiana and Marcus didn't hesitate. They grabbed ladders, buckets, and ropes, racing toward the pounding rain. The fight for the center had already begun, and neither of them was backing down. 3 days later, the envelope came. It was thin, official-looking, the kind of letter that could either breathe life into the Unity Community Center or bury it for good. Tiana stood in the main hall with Maria, Carlos, and a handful of volunteers. Marcus was there too, leaning against one of the freshly painted support beams, his expression unreadable. Her fingers trembled as she tore the flap. The room was silent, except for the creak of the paper as she unfolded it. Final inspection. Results. Facility cleared for operation. She read the words twice before they sank in. "We passed," she whispered. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Maria let out a whoop. Carlos threw his cap into the air, and the room exploded into cheers. Marcus smiled, not the polite, businesslike curve of his mouth she'd seen before, but something warmer, real. Tiana turned toward him. We couldn't have done this without you. He shook his head. You could have. But I'm glad you didn't have to. The volunteers began bustling around, already planning a celebration. The piano in the corner came to life with a few triumphant chords. Tiana stepped closer to Marcus, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You said you weren't walking away. I meant it, he replied. Her eyes searched his face. Then maybe it's time I start believing you. He didn't push for more. Didn't need to. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded sheet of paper. What's this? Funding proposal, he said simply. For expanding Unity. More classrooms, better facilities, even a computer lab. No strings attached. Just a start. Tiana opened it, scanning the neat, deliberate handwriting. Her throat tightened. Marcus. He shrugged lightly, but there was a softness in his eyes. Like I said, if it matters to you, it matters to me. For the first time since they'd met in that rainy alley, she smiled without reservation. The sunlight slanted through the high windows, painting long golden stripes across the hall. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the small victory inside this battered building. But for those within its walls, it wasn't just survival. It was the promise of a future. And for Tiana and Marcus, it was the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined, something worth protecting. The morning after the storm, the Unity Community Center smelled faintly of wet wood and disinfectant. Volunteers moved like clockwork, drying floors, hanging fans, pushing damp furniture into the sun outside. Tiana walked the perimeter with a clipboard, noting every water stain, every warped floorboard. Her stomach twisted with each mark. The inspection was less than 48 hours away, and the building looked like it had just survived a war. Marcus came in through the side door, phone pressed to his ear, his voice clipped but controlled. Yes, I need an emergency crew. Today. And tell them I'll triple their usual rate if they're here within the hour. He ended the call and caught her watching. We're going to be ready. She shook her head. You can't just throw money at... I'm not. He interrupted, stepping closer. I'm throwing urgency at it. There's a difference. Before she could answer, Maria entered with a stack of flyers. These are for tomorrow night, she said, holding them out. Tiana frowned. What's tomorrow night? Marcus answered for her. A rally. If the inspectors come in thinking this is just an old building, we show them it's the heart of this neighborhood. We fill it with people, music, kids, parents. They'll see what they're trying to shut down. Tiana blinked at him. You organized a rally without asking me? He smiled faintly. I figured you'd say no, but you won't now. She hated that he was right. The rest of the day was a blur. Marcus called in contractors to fix the worst of the damage. Men working in tight shifts, some on ladders, others on hands and knees repairing flooring. David managed permits and paperwork, his tablet never leaving his hand. By nightfall, the building looked not perfect, but alive again. The following evening, the Unity Community Center was transformed. Strings of warm lights hung across the hall. Long tables were covered with food from local shops, all donated. Children's paintings, some still damp from fresh strokes, lined the walls. The sound of the piano filled the air, played by a boy no older than 12. Parents sat in folding chairs talking quietly, while others walked with paper plates in hand. Tiana moved through the crowd in quiet awe. She spotted Marcus near the front door, shaking hands with an elderly shop owner. Maria appeared at her side. I still don't know if I trust him completely, she admitted. But this is smart. Tiana nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. At one point, Marcus caught her eye from across the room. For a moment, the noise of the rally seemed to fade, replaced by the steady weight of his gaze. There was no triumph in it. Just something quieter, steadier, like a promise he wasn't ready to put into words. The morning air was sharp and cold when the two city inspection vans rolled to a stop outside the Unity Community Center. Their engines idled for a moment before the doors opened and 3 inspectors stepped out, clipboards in hand. Tiana was already waiting in the entryway, her palms damp, her smile polite but tight. Marcus stood beside her, a quiet wall of calm, hands in the pockets of his tailored coat. David hovered just behind them, tablet at the ready. The lead inspector, a tall man with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, shook Tiana's hand. "Ms. Reyes, this shouldn't take long." Tiana forced a smile. "Take as much time as you need. We've been expecting you." The inspectors moved inside, eyes sweeping over every surface, every seam in the walls. The scent of fresh paint still lingered faintly. Marcus followed them closely, David quietly sliding photographs and repair invoices across their view at every stop. Proof of ongoing renovations, emergency permits, certified contractors. In the main hall, the lead inspector looked up at the newly patched ceiling and made a note on his clipboard. "Water damage?" "Repaired within the last 48 hours, Marcus said evenly. "All receipts and materials are documented. We also had a mold inspection yesterday. Results came back clear. Reports on your desk already." The inspector studied him. "And you are?" "Marcus Wellington. I'm funding the repairs." The man's brows lifted slightly, but he didn't comment. From the corner of her eye, Tiana caught movement at the front door. A man in an expensive charcoal suit had slipped inside, leaning casually against the wall. She recognized him instantly. Raymond Holt, the developer whose name she'd heard whispered since the inspection notice arrived. He waited until the inspectors moved upstairs before strolling toward her. "Quite a show you're putting on," he said smoothly. "But we both know this building's on its last legs. You could save yourself the trouble and sell. My offer still stands, and it's generous." Tiana's jaw clenched. "Not interested." His smile sharpened. "You will be when the city shuts you down." Marcus appeared at her side before she could answer. His presence shifted the air immediately. "Funny thing, Holt," he said, his tone like steel. "I've already spoken to 3 council members about your little condo project. Seems they're not too keen on the idea of bulldozing a community hub for families and kids." Holt's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Marcus stepped closer. "You're not buying this place, not now, not ever. So do yourself a favor, stop circling." Holt's jaw ticked, but he backed away without another word. When the inspectors returned downstairs, their expressions were unreadable. The lead inspector closed his clipboard. "We'll be in touch with our decision." After they left, Tiana exhaled, only then realizing she'd been holding her breath. "You didn't have to go after him like that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," Marcus replied, "because I'm not here to watch someone take what matters to you." For the first time, she didn't argue. 3 days later, the envelope came. It was thin, official-looking, the kind of letter that could either breathe life into the Unity Community Center or bury it for good. Tiana stood in the main hall with Maria, Carlos, and a handful of volunteers. Marcus was there too, leaning against one of the freshly painted support beams, his expression unreadable. Her fingers trembled as she tore the flap. The room was silent, except for the creak of the paper as she unfolded it. Final inspection. Results. Facility cleared for operation. She read the words twice before they sank in. "We passed," she whispered. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Maria let out a whoop. Carlos threw his cap into the air, and the room exploded into cheers. Marcus smiled, not the polite, business-like curve of his mouth she'd seen before, but something warmer, real. Tiana turned toward him. "We couldn't have done this without you." He shook his head. "You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." The volunteers began bustling around, already planning a celebration. The piano in the corner came to life with a few triumphant chords. Tiana stepped closer to Marcus, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You said you weren't walking away." "I meant it," he replied. Her eyes searched his face. "Then maybe it's time I start believing you." He didn't push for more. Didn't need to. Instead, He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded sheet of paper. "What's this?" "Funding proposal," he said simply. "For expanding Unity. More classrooms, better facilities, even a computer lab. No strings attached. Just a start." Tiana opened it, scanning the neat, deliberate handwriting. Her throat tightened. "Marcus." He shrugged lightly, but there was a softness in his eyes. "Like I said, if it matters to you, it matters to me." For the first time since they'd met in that rainy alley, she smiled without reservation. The sunlight slanted through the high windows, painting long golden stripes across the hall. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the small victory inside this battered building. But for those within its walls, it wasn't just survival. It was the promise of a future. And for Tiana and Marcus, it was the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined, something worth protecting. The rain that had once soaked them in a cold, narrow alley was gone now, replaced by sunlight spilling through clean windows and laughter echoing off newly painted walls. Months ago, Marcus had followed a woman he didn't understand into the shadows, and found himself in the light. Tiana had been fighting for a place she believed in, not knowing someone else was ready to fight beside her. And now, standing in a hall that would outlive storms and greedy hands alike, they understood the truth. Sometimes, the greatest fortune isn't what you keep, but what you give away.